Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today is Friday, October 16th, so you know what I'm talking about when I say today. It's time to take a look at the current status of the race for the United States Senate. Now, I know I'm overdue, but with everything that happened at the beginning of the month, from the passing of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg to the scandal in North Carolina, I wanted to wait to put some distance between all of that and this video, so I could see if there was any potential impact that it might have on polling. Now we have some, and we're good to go. Before we get started, if you're new here, welcome. This is a pretty good example of what we do here, along with election night videos, as well as historical and what-if election scenario videos. So if you like what you see, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell notification icon for updates on all new videos. Speaking of videos, in the last Senate video, Democrats pulled out 16 out of 35 seats on the ballot to finish with 51 and clear control of the Senate. But there have been a lot of polls since then, with some races tightening and some pulling away. In other words, positive and negative news for both parties, pretty much perfectly encapsulating the state of the Senate campaign so far. As a reminder, states not on the ballot this year start the Democrats off with a 35 to 30 seat lead, as you can see here. They need 16 seats to get to 51 in a clear majority, or 15 plus a Biden victory in the presidency to take control. Republicans, playing major defense this election, need 21 to guarantee control and 20 for tiebreaker control with a Trump re-election. Here we have the safe state map. As always, we're starting with safe seats already colored in. If you're a return viewer, welcome back, and thank you as well for indulging me. Also, you'll notice a few not too surprising changes over last time, and one you might find surprising. Through most of the first half of the year, there was very little to no Senate polling in both the states of New Hampshire and Virginia, mostly because the GOP didn't seem overly interested in putting up much more than a cursory fight for them. Both now have their opponents for the general election, and both are better described as sacrificial lambs rather than actual opponents. Incumbent Democratic Senators Mark Warner of Virginia and Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire are romping in the polls and officially aren't going anywhere, so both seats are safe Democrat. I also want to touch on the state of Colorado because I fully expect someone to bring it up if I don't. Former Democratic Governor John Hickenlooper has led in every poll since he declared his campaign for the Senate in the spring. He maintained those leads throughout the summer, averaging well over 12 points. Not to mention 3 polls over the last week show Hickenlooper with double-digit leads. To rest the case, the GOP has officially yanked funding for Gardner. Hickenlooper's leads may have fallen from their high, but he's still averaging right around 10 points for a while now, making him the overwhelming favorite and the seat safe Democrat. Lastly, in spite of a couple of results from Democratic pollsters over the summer showing a closer race in Alabama between incumbent Senator Doug Jones and Republican nominee and former college football coach Tommy Tuberville, everything else has a gap roughly the size of the Grand Canyon. So I am officially going to start calling Tuberville Senator-elect because he's going to the Senate. Safe Republican. This puts the Democrats in a solid but not insurmountable position of needing 5 of the remaining 12 seats to guarantee control of the Senate, 4 with a Biden victory. Republicans have a steeper hill to climb, needing 10 to guarantee retaining control, 9 with a Trump victory. That said, all but 1 of those 12 are currently Republican seats. One notable change is Texas, which was safe last video, and that's where we start. Texas has looked like it was in the bag for Republicans since, the 90s. Texas hasn't sent a Democrat to the Senate since Lloyd Bentsen won re-election back in 1988, and while Ted Cruz narrowly won re-election during the Blue Wave election of 2018, it seems like Republican Senator John Cornyn could pencil in another 6 years once he was re-elected in 2014. But something is going on in the Lone Star State. Joe Biden is the first competitive Democratic presidential candidate in Texas since Jimmy Carter back in 1976. Cruz's victory aside, 2018 was not a good year for Texas Republicans as they lost a number of seats in the House, and that's threatening to happen again in this year's House elections. Still, Cornyn won with nearly 62% of the vote in 2014, and his opponent, Democrat M.J. Hager, not only lost a congressional seat she ran for in 2018, but she seems stuck in the polls with a ceiling of around 40% through most of the summer. This in spite of having some national notoriety for having one of her campaign ads go viral back in 2018. Then something happened. The end of July, Cornyn had his first poll without a double-digit lead. Then they started regularly coming in in the 8 to 9 point range through August. September rolled around and the most common poll gave him leads of around 7% as Hager's numbers continued to climb, but his average was still around 10%. By that point, the presidential race had gone from Biden close with Trump leading to being neck and neck, and it appears Biden has brought Hager with him. That said, Biden hasn't brought her all the way up as he continues to outperform her. Biden is trading leads with the president while Hager has yet to lead in a single poll. Cornyn also has the power of incumbency behind him, and that's hard to beat. This one may end up being closer than expected, but for now, it's likely Republican. Arizona has become a bit of a recurring nightmare for the GOP. After handing a win to a Democrat in the Senate back in 2018 for the first time in 30 years, 2020 hasn't gotten any better. Polls have not only shown Biden ahead consistently, although the race has tightened of late, they've had appointed incumbent Senator Martha McSally drowning against Democratic nominee and former astronaut Mark Kelly. Now, while every single poll has shown Kelly ahead, it hasn't been by a double-digit average since just prior to the summer. Since then, the only polls showing the race close are Republican polling houses, and McSally is even losing in those. It's probably too late for Kelly to get a big enough lead for the seat to be considered safe, but it's highly unlikely at this point that Kelly is going to lose this close to Election Day. Likely Democrat. Michigan has been a walk all year long for Senate Democrats in spite of incumbent Senator Gary Peters being, basically tapioca pudding in a suit. Peters is not the most inspiring politician, and he's going against a very charismatic Republican nominee in John James. Still, Peters not only held consistently large leads over the summer, he outperformed former Vice President and Democratic nominee Joe Biden for all of 2020, or Biden underperforms Peters, take your pick. Then September came, and a state that I came very close to declaring safe for Democrats back in early summer now has polls showing James charging and Peters' leads dropping down into the mid to high single digits, which is still good, but not what it once was. It was also announced recently that a Republican Political Action Committee has agreed to drop literally millions of dollars into the campaign on James' behalf. A pretty dramatic turn of events for a seat that Democrats could have and probably should have wrapped up by now. Still, closing or not, James has led in one poll, over this entire campaign, and that was by 1 point 14 months ago. James needs to start leading in some polls, or the status quo in Michigan remains the status quo in Michigan, no matter how excited the GOP gets. Likely Democrat. Mississippi has been all over the place in its polls, showing anything from a 1-point lead to a 28-point lead. The one constant in all of this has been all of those leads belong to the same person, GOP incumbent Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, who after winning a special election in 2018 has to be considered the overwhelming favorite in a rematch with 2018 Democratic nominee Mike Espy. You lead in every poll, you get a likely Republican. Believe it or not, that's the end of the likelies. As I said at the beginning, things have tightened up a lot, mostly as potential cross-party voters have started finding their way back home to their registered parties. It makes it much more interesting for election junkies like us, but much more nerve-wracking for political operatives everywhere. On to the leans. Alaska is being squirrely. I can't think of any other way to put it. The state has always been a Republican stronghold, especially on the presidential level, but it's important to remember that current Republican Senator Dan Sullivan barely won his seat back in 2014, and early polls showed a tight race with Democratic nominee, and yes, those are implied air quotes because he's actually a registered independent, Al Gross. Follow-up polls showed the race as tighter than expected. Again, squirrely. Now, a brand new poll shows Gross ahead for the first time. That is definitely confirmation that things are close right now. But one poll isn't enough to change his status or to ignore historical precedent. That said, the race does get a downgrade to leans Republican. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Kansas has no right being here. Yes, I suppose the same thing could be said of Alaska, but they've at least elected a Democrat to the Senate as recently as 2008. Kansas hadn't done it since a special election back in 1930. That's 90 years ago if you're keeping score. And they voted him out 2 years later. In 2020, the race for the Republican Senate nomination was a bit contentious. Firebrand and uber Trump supporter Chris Kobach, whom Senator Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was terrified would win and give Democrats another easy pickup, because that's exactly what happened in the 2018 governor's race because of Kobach, decided to run for the nomination. He battled establishment favorite Roger Marshall. Marshall won, but if the establishment picked Marshall expecting an easy cruise to victory, they were sorely mistaken. The Democrats nominated State Senator Barbara Bollier, a former Republican who changed parties back in 2018 due to her displeasure with the path of the party's rhetoric. Her centrism makes Bollier more palatable to a lot of Kansans who otherwise would rather vote for a bag of manure than a Democrat. Polling holds that out. While Marshall has led in most polls since winning the nomination, they've mostly been of the 1 to 3 point variety, and 2 were complete ties. You'll also notice that I said most and not all, a point hammered home by the fact Bollier has led in 2 of the last 3 polls. But the last 2, which they split, those are the ones that are most interesting. Why single those 2 polls out? The one showing Marshall ahead gave him just a 4-point lead. It was also conducted by a Republican pollster and paid for by a political action committee created to help elect, you guessed it, Roger Marshall. The other, with Bollier ahead, was conducted by the pollster who last worked for, you guessed it, Chris Kobach. If you wonder whether the state actually is close, and history says it is completely valid to be skeptical at this point, when your own PAC releases a poll with you in the lead by only 4 points in a state you should be running away with, and the other pollster used to poll for your competitor for the nomination, it's a close race. But as I've said before, a lead is a lead, and Marshall has led most of the way, but that lead is shrinking. Leans Republican, but if polls continue to trend towards Bollier, watch out. Montana has been a bit of a roller coaster this election. Not Millennium Force at Cedar Point kind of roller coaster, mind you, more like, say, Goofy's Barnstormer at Disney World. There's movement and some dips and some climbs, but nothing that'll make you hurl your $15 nachos over the side of the car. It started off close, which was expected. Popular 2-term Democratic Governor Steve Bullock declared and was quickly running neck and neck with and even leading incumbent Republican Senator Steve Daines through midsummer. Then Daines started to get some traction, and he took a small but consistent lead. By summer's end, in a recurring theme, Bullock had again begun to close in on Daines and is now trading leads with him since about mid-September. Now, all of this has been happening with Trump polling at or over 50%, with leads in the high single digits. This is another close one, but the president's lead most likely means coattails, so the race is leans Republican. South Carolina is another shocker. Some polling early after the pandemic hit showed a stunningly close race for incumbent Republican Senator Lindsey Graham and Democratic challenger Jamie Harrison. South Carolina has been a very conservative state for decades, but is in the interesting position of having one of the largest black populations in the nation, which helps Harrison, who is black, and Democrats in general, while absolutely hating its senator up for re-election. A solid debate performance by Harrison didn't help the incumbent any. The two have been trading leads all month after Graham led in every poll at one point since March, but the leads were usually small. A poll released this week shows Graham with a 6-point lead, tying for his largest since July. The fact this race is close is an absolute disaster for Graham, who went so far as to emphatically ask for donations 5 times during one recent Fox News interview. If there is a funding issue, that doesn't bode well for Graham, who could be swamped in targeted advertising. But history and Graham's lead being more frequent and larger suggests Harrison is still in Graham's shadow. Leans Republican. That has the GOP closing the gap to 48-47 with 5 seats to go. However, Maine's Susan Collins is in trouble. That's not a fact that can be disputed. How much trouble is a little more difficult to pin down. Her status as the female John McCain willing to buck her own party has taken a bit of a hit during the Trump presidency, and Mainers have shown a preference for politicians with a true independent streak. Democratic nominee and Maine Speaker of the House Sarah Gideon has led in almost every poll since early summer, some by double digits, but over the last few months, a pattern of averaging a 5-point lead has developed. Because of that, it's difficult to list the race any higher than leans Democrat, but right now, Gideon is in the driver's seat. In Georgia, all hell is broken loose. Forget the GOP stronghold situation back in the summer, which showed not only the president ahead, but incumbent GOP Senator Dave Perdue with a comfortable lead, and not one, but 2 Republican candidates expected to grab the top 2 spots in an expected runoff in the state's special election. That seat is currently held by appointed Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler. In Georgia's normal Senate race, Perdue is in a big fight with Democratic nominee Jon Ossoff. Perdue, as I mentioned, was ahead for most of the summer with a small but consistent lead. However, like a lot of these races, things started changing as the summer came to a close. Starting in August, Ossoff began climbing in the polls, slowly catching up and eventually even passing the first-term senator. Once September rolled around, Ossoff and Perdue were regularly exchanging leads, meaning the race has become a true toss-up. That has continued into this week, with Ossoff leading in 3 polls and Perdue leading in 2. Ossoff's rise coincides with recent polls showing Biden taking a lead over President Trump in the state. Right now, it seems whomever wins the state for the presidency will likely drag their Senate candidate over the finish line with them. In this case, right now, that's Biden and Ossoff. Leans Democrat, which gives Democrats 50 seats, meaning a Biden victory would give them control of the Senate. Republicans would need to win all 3 of the remaining seats and the president win re-election to maintain control of the Senate. In the special election, Senator Loeffler is battling U.S. Representative and Trump-endorsed Doug Collins for the upper hand of the conservative vote. Both traded leads throughout the summer as all Democrats languished below 20%, with a GOP versus GOP runoff seeming more and more likely as the summer went on. But the Democratic Party apparently figured out something that the GOP has not. Unlike Doritos, The Mandalorian, and playoff football, more is not better when it comes to political campaigns. The Democrats' 3 current candidates on the ballot are Matt Lieberman, son of Joe Lieberman, yes, that Joe Lieberman, former Georgia State Senator Ed Tarver, and Atlanta Reverend Raphael Warnock. But over the last few weeks, following months of poll after poll showing the GOP taking not one, but both of the 2 top spots to move on to the runoff, which is required by state law when no one candidate receives a majority of votes, Democrats have coalesced around one candidate, Warnock. That has pushed him into contention and now into the lead. Tarver never got out of low single digits, and Lieberman has seen his support crater from a high of the upper teens in the first half of the year to an average of mid-single digits over the last 3 polls. Both men have said they will not drop out, but it appears poll respondents may have made that decision for them. Warnock has led in every poll this month, 7 in all, making it very likely that he will move on to the expected runoff. With the likelihood of this now being a 3-person race rather than a 2-person race, questions now arise. Can Warnock maintain this surge to make it to the runoff? And, if so, which Republican candidate will make it to the runoff with him? While it is still possible that Collins and Loeffler could eke out the top 2 spots for a GOP versus GOP face-off, much more concerning for Georgia Republicans has to be that for the first time this cycle, their combined lead across party candidates is gone, and the special election is now neck and neck when you compare combined support for the Republican candidates and the Democratic candidates. That is important to consider when there is a potential runoff. That said, if Warnock does make it to the runoff, Democrats don't have the greatest track record in Georgia runoffs. That and the possibility of an intra-party runoff still being on the table, as well as Georgia's recent voting history, makes it difficult to mark the special election as anything but leans Republican right now. However, this is a race that might not just go down to the wire, but past it and out the stadium door before a winner is even known. North Carolina had been a very static race most of the year, with Republican incumbent Senator Thom Tillis in serious danger. Then in early October, it was revealed that Democratic candidate Cal Cunningham let his fingers do the walking a little too much and friendly-like with a woman who was not his wife. Then it was more than sexting. Then there were suggestions it was more than one woman. Suddenly, Democrats' near sure thing in North Carolina was now in question. North Carolina has easily taken the crown as the most polled state in the nation this election because of its newly minted swing state status on the presidential side and the close Senate race. Inexplicably, it took almost 2 weeks for polls to start rolling in, suggesting polls had stopped in the state. Now, Cunningham is a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army and a veteran of both the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, having been awarded a Bronze Star for the former. He's retired, but remains in the Army Reserve. All of this plays well in very pro-military North Carolina, but the question remains, does that override the negativity of a juicy sex scandal? The problem for Republicans is they may not have the person to take advantage of all of this. Tillis barely won his seat back in 2014 and hasn't led in the polls since June, even with the scandal. If that doesn't sound very impressive, keep in mind there have been 65, yes, that's 60 with a 5, polls since Tillis last had a lead. And even then, it was a partisan poll with only a 1-point lead. The other 3, ties. So why was this never a safe state for the Democrats? Even before the scandal, Cunningham's leads have vacillated all over the place, from 1 point all the way up to 16 during those 65 polls. There is still a chance the scandal draws blood, but the longer it goes without doing so, the less the chance that it does. Leans Democrat. Iowa is, has been, and probably will be for the rest of the election cycle the closest race in the nation. Beginning in the summer, Democratic nominee Sarah Greenfield had a small lead over incumbent Republican Senator Joni Ernst. In August, Ernst split leads with Greenfield 3-3. But starting in September, Greenfield had gone back in front, leading in 11 of the last 13 polls with 2 ties. Thursday, last night for me, the two debated, and there was one moment that has already gone viral. During the debate, the two were asked a question about the price of soybeans. Greenfield nailed the question to the penny, but Ernst was off. Way off. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are rolling your eyes. I know you are. Don't deny it. I can hear them. They were so loud, I heard them days before you did it. But remember, Iowa isn't Alabama, where supporting the president is considered a requirement for the job right now. They expect the people they send to Washington to actually be Iowa's representatives in the federal government. Iowa is a regional state rather than a national one. They vote on local politics, even in federal elections. And when policy affects the state negatively, like, I don't know, say a trade war with China that affects the state's agriculture, they take notice. They also take notice when someone who presented themselves 6 years ago as a true Iowan doesn't know how the state's number 2 revenue resource is doing. It may amount to nothing, but when you're behind in the polls, such things are not helpful for your cause. Leans Democrat, which gives them 52 seats and complete control of the Senate. If you ask me what the ultimate takeaway from all of this is, besides the Democrats increasing their advantage from the last video, I would say it has to be that there has been a lot of movement. Whether it is the beginning of Republicans improving their chances of retaining control of the Senate or Democrats being on the verge of a big increase in seats remains to be seen. While Cunningham is still in the lead in North Carolina, it should be noted that he has lost support. Whether his numbers have stabilized or he ends up slowly hemorrhaging right up until Election Day is something we're not going to know until the votes are counted. The movement in Michigan should give Republicans some hope. Not a lot, but some. But then again, the rise of Warnock in Georgia makes what was starting to look like one of their best opportunities of the night to hold the chamber much less stable. Then again, the inability to put away Susan Collins and Joni Ernst for good has to also give Democrats pause. That said, the debate gaffe for Ernst may have happened too late in the campaign for anyone to know the true impact until the votes are counted, just like North Carolina. But it certainly didn't help her cause. It either did nothing or it hurt her. It's important to remember, even if a couple of those flipping to the Democrats right now flip back, it puts control of the Senate back into the hands of the nation's choice for president, since ties are broken by the vice president. That makes the race for the Senate even closer than it appears on the surface. So basically, 52 seats may sound like a lot, but I'm not comfortable predicting 52-48 as a final score right now, because there is just way too much fluidity to this entire Senate campaign. Some of these races are so close that the slightest change could completely flip it. North Carolina, Iowa, and both of Georgia's seats are now so uncertain they could easily go 4-0 for either party, something that seemed completely implausible over the summer. While the presidential election sucks up most of the angst and oxygen regarding how long it may take to know the winner, it's important to remember that control of the Senate could hinge on the results of that special election runoff in Georgia in January. People who think waiting a few days to a couple of weeks to know vote totals for the presidency is some kind of apocalyptic catastrophe, which, by the way, is something that used to be commonplace, we're just spoiled by technology today, are in for a world of hurt if they bother to pay attention to the Georgia special election. because it is now pretty much guaranteed that race won't be decided until the January runoff, which, by the way, takes place after the new Congress has already taken office.